Okay, section 3, we're just going to do the balance of payments in the freezing cold. Hence I've got this nice little bubble hat on here. And hopefully by the end of the session you will sort of understand everything that goes on with this particular subject. Balance of payments 2023. What you need to know is right now there's a real concern about our balance of payments. In 2002, I think it was roughly, I've got here 8% of GDP, but it was 8% of GDP in one quarter, roughly about 7% of GDP. This is quite high, right? Often it's been about 3 or 4% of GDP. Even that's a little bit high, but 7 or 8% is significantly high. And it also looks as if in 2023, it's going to be roughly the same sort of thing. Okay, so we got a large trade deficit. I think in 2017, our trade deficit was 6.3%. It's partially caused by the rise in the price of oil and gas. And if you think about it, that will have an inelastic demand curve. So therefore, if the price goes up, we're still going to buy almost as much. Think inelastic demand. There you go. Another reason why we need a green revolution, right? The green revolution, we wouldn't need to import £50 billion worth of oil and gas from abroad, and it'd be a damn sight cheaper than it is from there. Remember that AD is equal to C plus I plus G plus X minus M. X minus M. This part here is obviously going to be negative because in the UK our imports are greater than our exports. This will mean that there will be a fall in aggregate demand. So trade deficit means a fall in aggregate demand. So there's a chain of analysis there. Trade deficit, a fall in AD. You can draw the diagram. Therefore the multiplier accelerator works in reverse. Therefore there's an even bigger fall in AD. Okay, we can solve that problem by either the consumers spending money or the government spending more money, but both of that will maybe mean that the consumers are going to end up in debt, and with G, the government is going to end up in debt. Okay, next one on here. If I can open up a bit of paper, my hands are so cold that it's a little bit tricky. Is how is the exchange rate determined in the UK economy? By the supply and demand of sterling. So in the UK, we have a trade deficit, which means our imports are greater than our exports. The supply curve is linked to imports. Because if we want to buy an import from Europe, we have to change our sterling into the euro. So therefore, there will be greater supply of sterling. So therefore, the exchange rate will fall. Right. If we get, there are other factors that will affect the exchange rate. FDI. If FDI comes into the UK, then we will see a rise in demand for sterling. If hot money comes into the UK because the interest rate is high, it's currently 3.5%, then we will see a rise in the demand for sterling. Also, speculators will have a significant impact. At the moment, our economy is not looking that great in the UK. Surprise, surprise. So speculators may decide to sell sterling, which will decrease the exchange rate. And also we have a trade deficit, which will also push the exchange rate down. Right now, the UK exchange rate over a period of time has kept on falling, which is a sign really that our economy is not doing as well as it could. Right, there is a phrase called the beauty of floating exchange rates. This is it. Trade deficits, supply of sterling increases, therefore the exchange rate goes down, exchange rate falls, therefore the price of exports will go down, the price of imports will rise, the price of imports go up, that could create cost push inflation. We could draw this diagram here. This is a cost push inflation diagram. We will move from there to there. The balance of payment should improve. However, we then need to look at the Marshall-Lerner equation and also the J curve on there as well. Okay. But essentially the idea is a trade deficit will correct itself because the exchange rate will fall and therefore the balance of payments will improve. Then we go on to the current account. This is the basic things of the current account here. And then below that, we have a financial account. Now, roughly in the UK, this bit is always in negative. This could be called a trading goods, could be called visibles. The trading service is always positive. But this is the big one here. This is the big one here, which this used to be about plus £30 billion. It's now minus £30 billion. And this is the reason why this is the case is that lots of firms invested in the UK, great, but then we need to pay the interest and profits from that back to those countries. So this is the reason why the UK now has a deficit in this area, which creates all sorts of issues for us. We also have secondary income on there. Then overall, we have a trade deficit of that. Okay, so 2023, it was 7%. Looks like it's going to be about 7% again. 2022, 7%. How? So this is a constant theme as I go through this part. The role of long-term capital flows. Right. So here we're talking about the primary income. Profits go out of the primary account. Okay, because of FDI being invested into the UK. Now in the financial account, which will balance off the current account, it can either come from hot money from abroad if interest rates go up. This has been really, really important for the UK, is that we've been able to attract a lot of foreign direct investment has come into the UK. Obviously, we all know that increases the S curve, multiple accelerator interaction, creates more jobs, lower unemployment. This is part of Trustonomics' plan to have an economy which is really dynamic, so therefore loads of FDI will come into the UK, and then this will increase the underlying trend rate of growth, etc., etc. Or we have to borrow money from abroad, which is a bit of a disaster, and then could put downward pressure on the exchange rate. Okay, but this has been really important for the UK economy, this FDI. Okay, does a current account deficit matter? Well, it is a sign of a lack of competitiveness if we can't pay our own way, leads to a fall in the exchange rate, creates cost-push inflation, depends on the scale of the fall in the exchange rate. I would suggest that £1 is equal to €1 is pretty serious. £1 used to be equal to 1.5 euros, but £1 equal to something like 0.8 euros would be really, really bad because it creates massive cost-push inflation in the UK. So we can either borrow money or there will be a fall in aggregate demand as well on top of that. But in a way, we can argue no problems to the UK because we've got FDI, because we've got a very flexible labour market, good supply side factors. However, because of Brexit, we can't guarantee that this money will continue to come into the UK. Does a current account deficit matter? No problem, because you might get FDI. With globalisation, lots of financial capital flows may come into the UK, and the beauty of floating exchange rates. Conclusion, can we still rely on FDI? So this is the big issue. Okay. In the 1970s, for example, we had, because of our trade deficit, we then had to go out and borrow money from the International Monetary Fund. But right now, we're sort of getting into that sort of territory a little bit, I think. 7% of GDP, this is pretty scary. We've also got large levels of national debt. UK has a persistent trade deficit. One of the reasons being that in 1992, manufacturing was 22% of GDP. In 2023, it's now 10% of GDP. So is it time for a green revolution? Then we wouldn't need to import quite as many goods as we did before. And the next question is, why does the UK have a trade deficit? Pretty easy stuff, really. One is our manufacturing sector is so much smaller, deindustrialisation, so therefore we export fewer goods and have to import more goods. In the UK, we have a high marginal propensity to import, which means if incomes are rising, we spend a lot of that extra money on imports, and then this creates a problem for the UK economy. We also have a rise in the price of oil and gas and inelastic demand for those goods, so that will worsen our balance of payments, and also we have poor productivity. So this will mean our exports are more expensive, lack of capital investment in machinery, even though we have a low exchange rate, which we think should improve the trade deficit. And to also improve the trade deficit, of course, we could use supply side economics. Okay, so you might get, or this was an A-level question, assess the contribution of supply side economics in improving the current account. Okay, so I would start off with the intro. Yeah, we have a trade deficit. This is really serious. Yes, of course, supply side economics is a major factor in reducing the trade deficit, which was what Trustonomics is all about, reducing corporation tax, creating a more entrepreneurial society. So we talk about free market supply side and interventionist, maybe even a green revolution, etc., etc. And that, you have to relate that to how that will improve the balance of payments. Number two, however, we can also talk about the fall in the exchange rate. That will also make a difference as long as the Marshall-Lerner equation holds. There is the J curve here, which says after 18 months, our balance of payments should improve. If you can remember the Marshall-Lerner equation, which is if the sum of exports elasticities are greater than 1, then the balance of payments will improve. Paragraph 3, which is sort of related to this a little bit. If we can attract loads of FDI because we've got good supply side, low corporation tax, not only will that pay for the trade deficits, but it will also mean that we can export more goods, e.g. Nissan in Sunderland. Conclusion, the most important factor, yes, I'll probably say great supply side is the most important factor. However, because the UK is in such a bit of a mess right now, we probably need a lower exchange rate, and we also need to attract foreign direct investment. Okay, next one on here. Oh, should we be concerned about a trade deficit? Which I was meant to fill in, which I haven't done. Yes, we should be concerned about a trade deficit. Number one, because it means a fall in AD. Number two, because it could lead to a fall in the exchange rate. Not too bad if it's a small fall, but if it's a big fall, £1 is equal to say 0.8 euros, then that is going to create cost push inflation, and it actually sort of in a way just creates a lack of confidence in the UK economy. Okay, so, but however, of course, it might be paid for by FDI. However, in 2023, it is in fact pretty serious. Okay, it's just another problem that is affecting the UK right now. Okay, so we're coming towards the end now. Which is worse, a trade deficit or a budget deficit, right? This is one of these questions come up. I told you the story before. This did come up and nobody knew what to say because, well, which is worse, sir? We haven't studied that. Well, if you understand the problems of a trade deficit, if you understand the problems of a budget deficit, then answer that question. Okay, so you start off by saying, well, in the UK, we have a trade deficit, 7% of GDP. Our budget deficit this year will be about, I don't know what it's going to be, maybe 5 or 6% of GDP. These are fairly high figures, plus we have lots of levels of national debt. It's a bit like that question, which is worse, deflation or inflation? However, get the basics down. Trade deficit, decrease in AD, fall in the exchange rate, cost push inflation, creates macro instability. Speculators might start selling sterling, fall in the standard of living. However, if we get loads of FDI, then maybe it's not too much of a problem. Really cool paragraph. Budget deficit, crowding out effect, interest payments, higher interest rates on your debt, macro instability, a lack of confidence in the economy. Yeah, this is pretty serious right now because we have a national debt of 100% of GDP, etc., etc. However, maybe we could print money to solve the problem. However, a lot of people don't like that because that might create inflation, a lack of discipline in terms of your fiscal policy. Okay, so we would go through all that. We've written a great essay so far, 16, 17 out of 25. Well, how are we going to conclude? And hopefully you're thinking about that right now. Conclusions. Sorry, I've just seen that I spelt the word incorrectly. I didn't have to spell it, but I made a mistake. Right, both are dangerous. Okay, particularly in the UK's case, because we've got a large trade deficit and we've got high levels of national debt, which is 100% plus of GDP. The combination of both are very serious for the UK. That's what I would say, particularly right now. They are significantly high. When the Greek economy crashed, they had a 10% trade deficit. When the Spanish economy crashed, they had a 10% trade deficit. Okay, a collapse could cause a collapse in the exchange rate, cost push inflation, cost living crisis, all of those things. But it does depend upon the size of these things. Okay, depends how large they are. And I would say our national debt right now is pretty high. Obviously, if you have a budget deficit, then that will add to national debt. And our trade deficit is also pretty high. So in a way, you're sort of saying, well, both are really dangerous. However, it's probably easier to come up with a conclusion. Right now, I might argue that it is the trade deficit. because is the exchange rate could collapse, and that could create cost push inflation. Okay, and then maybe we can sort of print money to get over that problem. Thank you very much. I reckon that's about 19 minutes.